this is going to be over the top, but I can see the first two rows and the rest I'm blinded. So if you raise your hand when I'm in the back, just come up front. So yeah, thanks Mark for that introduction. My name is Kris Buytaert, and as Mark just introduced me, I'm one of the people who co-founded Devops Days back in 2009 in Ghent. I used to be a developer. About 20 years ago, I was actually writing Java code. I was writing C, PHP. And for the past 15 years, I've been helping organizations to deliver software faster. I've been pretty much doing that with open source only. And then somewhere in 2007, I got to meet Patrick Dubois, and we kind of got this idea to start a conference. And it was one of the many conferences today I'm involved in. So who can explain me what DevOps is about? Who's awake? Who's alive? Oh boy, Mark, we have a dead audience here. Who's a human being? There's one human being in the audience. Okay, so in Romania, nobody raises their hands. Good to know. So if you guys don't want to explain, let me explain it. This is a current screenshot of DevOpsDays.org, and that is where the whole DevOps movement started. It's a conference we started in 2007 in Ghent. Today, there's, as you can see, a lot of events going on globally. Mark is involved in the Amsterdam organization, so am I. And if you look at what we started, we brought together a number of people with a background in open source, agile, and cloud. And that's pretty much what the foundations were. The people who were building and delivering software with this kind of background. We had a small conference, formal tracks in the morning, open spaces in the afternoon, and people were really exchanging their ideas. They were talking about the problems they had dealing with operations people, dealing with developers, figuring out how to improve this game of deploying software. But that's not really a good definition yet. So let me move to a better definition. Those two gentlemen, Damon Edwards and John Willis, they had a podcast called DevOps Cafe. And they were interviewing a number of people that after a couple of months, after a couple of years, were, for them, really doing DevOps. They were interviewing them, and out of those interviews, they came up with 4 key components: culture, automation, measurement and monitoring, and sharing. And those 4 key components is what I'm going to talk to you about today. That is what, for a lot of people, DevOps stands for. We've added the lean part. There's been a lot of other influences. But for a lot of people, CAMS is what DevOps is about. So let's start with culture. And let's start with looking at what the problem really is about. And it is really about how organizations are built, how people work together, and how software is being deployed. And if you look at an old or even current style organization, you see that there's a couple of big groups. There's the development team, and on this screen actually that doesn't work. There's the development team, and on the other side of the wall there's the operations team. And the bigger your organization grows, there's a development team, there's a team in charge of managing the applications, there's a team in charge of doing storage, there's a team in charge of doing networking. And you kind of get to this point where there's so much confusion, so many people trying to work together but not even knowing who they should talk to, that this becomes a maze and nobody actually gets stuff done. And those teams typically also had completely different goals. So if you had the head of development, his bonus was calculating on the number of new releases, on the number of new features, on the new platforms he was delivering, on the new functionality he was giving to the business. Those people were playing with new architectures, new software strategies, new tools, and they were pretty much being paid on delivering functional requirements. And then on the other side of the wall, you had the operations team. And those people were getting their bonuses at the end of the year, if they did not have downtime, if they had a stable platform, if it was a scalable platform, and basically if they had made themselves invisible, because things just worked and nothing crashed. So their bonus was based on the non-functional requirements. So how do you expect those people to get along? How do you expect that if you have an organization where two teams have completely opposing goals, they can actually work together? Well, they didn't. So on top of that, in these kind of organizations, there was a lot of bureaucracy, there was a lot of rules being put in place, a lot of traditions, both written and unwritten. And people, basically when they walked into the office, they turned off their brains and they started doing what they were being told. A lot of those organizations were dealing with more managers than engineers, more people actually telling what people should do than rather people doing stuff. So kind of the problems that started showing up is that in those organizations, the good engineers, the people that were actually building things, were leaving. And part of the problem is the way careers in technology have looked at. So you start as a software engineer or an ops engineer, you're a junior guy, you move into a more mature role, you become a senior engineer, and then the next way to get a better pay level is to become a manager. And for me, somebody who says, I just became a manager, that means he got degraded because he just lost all the passion he had before of building stuff and making real good stuff. And there's a term for that, it's called the Peter Principle. It's where basically people get promoted beyond their level of competence. So rather than keep doing what people are good at, which was building stuff, which was writing software, which was engineering platforms, they now became managers. And they were proud of that. And the only way up in an organization was to get more managers. So we end up in this huge organizations who today have 5 to 7 layers of management and like 10% of people doing actual engineering work on top. And then there's even another part, people who stop writing code and start architecting things and actually don't have any feeling with writing code anymore. And all of those organizational problems are kind of what's currently preventing us to deploy software fastly, quickly, and scalable. So, Devoops. What is Devoops? It's basically people figuring out that, well, there's a problem. We've built this piece of software and now we need to put it in production. And typically what happens is at a Friday morning on 7, or even Friday evening at 7, I've had it happen. There's people showing up like, here's a tarball, can you put this in production? Like, what do you mean, put it in production? And 5 to 10 years ago, it used to be a tarball. These days, it's, here's a Docker container, can you put this in production? Like, what do you mean, put this in production? We don't have machines for this. We don't know how to deploy this. We have no databases. Have you thought about security? Where are the users coming from? Are you going to do backups? Do we need to scale this? I mean, my computer can't install this. How do you expect me to deploy this on 20 or 200 machines? So, pretty shortly after that, we can't deploy this, we can't run it. So you get to the point where, oh, it crashed. How do we deal with this? And it's like, oops, we should have talked to those ops guys before. That's what it was 10 years ago. These days it's pretty much, oh, let's do it in a container. Same problem. How did you build this? How do you monitor this? If your end users come shouting and say, hey, stuff broke, yeah, things haven't changed. So it really is about collaborating. It really is about adopting a different mindset, adopting a different way of working together. And moving towards a more DevOps mindset, style, vision. It's not a technical problem. If you want to go doing this, it's really about human beings. So, in my role as a DevOps evangelist, I've been coaching a lot of organizations into moving towards a more DevOpsy approach. ING being one of them. I spent 3.5 years helping different teams in Amsterdam, some with good success, some with lesser success. But what we each time in all of those organizations saw is, this is a story about change management. This is a story where you get the 20% of really early adopters, the people you really want to find. Those are your peers. Those are the people who want to see things happen. Get them together. Get those people to actually build things. Get those people to start working together and give them the freedom to build something new and different from before. And then you get the 60% of slow adopters. There's the one who sit there and is like, yeah, well, this is the 15th reorganization that we've had in the past 7 years, so things will keep going on. We probably won't change, and they'll sit there. They might find it a good idea, they might think it's not a good idea, they just stay there quiet. But slowly you'll see that they'll adopt to those new early adopters. They'll see what they're doing, and the early adopters will probably start creating some kind of envy, and the 60% of slow waiters, they'll be like, yeah, maybe that is a better way to do things. And then you get the 20% of people who say no. The 20% of people were like, nah, I've been doing my job for this like 10 years, I'm not gonna change, I'm too old to change. I don't even understand what you guys are trying to do, it's probably stupid, so I'm not gonna change. And those are the people, you have two options with them. The first one is fire them on the spot. The second one is ignore them. But you should not try to get them convinced, because that's just gonna be wasting your effort. You should focus on getting those 60% converted and supporting those first 20%. That's where you'll get the power to actually introduce that change. So I've seen organizations who try to get to this point by taking a really formal project-based approach. We're going to write out a really big project plan and going to say these are the sequential steps we need to do in order to get DevOps going. Like say we're going to do DevOps on May 1st. May 1st we're all going to be DevOps. How did that work out for you guys? Very well, yeah. I have recordings that say different. And you kind of feel the struggle there. How do you introduce a new culture in an old way style? It's really hard. It's really hard to tell people that they need to behave differently, while the exact way of doing so is like you've been doing before. So when people start doing DevOps, they talk about, let's build a DevOps team, or even let's build 150 of them. And for me, that's really one of the anti-patterns. It gives you easy the idea that a DevOps team is the new way of doing things, and typically that's what's happening. Typically what happens is they build a team that's in charge of running the tools. It's the team in charge of Puppet infrastructure. It's the team in charge of Jenkins, of the CI infrastructure. It's the team inside of monitoring. Or it's the team who's actually responsible to deliver software. And even the worst part, it's actually one of the most typical setups, is when they introduce the DevOps teams, it's actually the team in between the developers and the operations people. So if you go back to one of the first slides where I had people throwing stuff over the wall, creating a wall of confusion, creating barriers and handover moments, putting a DevOps team in between the ops and the dev people is actually exactly the opposite of what you want to try to achieve. You just made the problem bigger. The next thing people do is they start hiring DevOps engineers. Who's a DevOps engineer here? You should raise your hand if you're a DevOps engineer, but, well, if you're a DevOps engineer, are you an ops person? Are you a Java developer? Are you something in between? Are you a full stack engineer? What's a full stack engineer? Who's a full stack engineer? So you're a full stack engineer. That means you do kernel development, database, middleware, and front. Is your name in the Linux kernel? Is your name in the Linux kernel? You're not a full stack engineer. I can say that mine is. So what is a DevOps engineer? A DevOps engineer is a cheap ploy for a recruiter to hire a senior Linux operations person on a junior rate. That's a DevOps engineer. Typically in organizations who's hiring DevOps engineers thinks that it's a role they need to fill in. And DevOps is not something you do on your own. So hiring a DevOps engineer is probably the first step into not achieving, into adopting more DevOps practices. You can get DevOps evangelists, you can DevOps practitioners, but you cannot get a DevOps engineer. Because when you get a DevOps engineer, it's the sole ranger who's going to try to change everything and he's going to fail. It's a guy who's going to have to fix everything. Have any of you read The Phoenix Project? So The Phoenix Project is this novel-style book which explains how an organization went to a complete transition. And there's this guy called Brent in that book, who basically is the guy everybody goes to. He's the guy who fixes everything and doesn't share his knowledge. And he's a single point of failure of the whole organization. Well, he's the DevOps engineer. He's the one who is basically preventing the organization from moving faster. So you got a bunch of DevOps engineers and nothing happens. And then management comes and says, so we tried this. We tried a DevOps team, we tried the DevOps engineers. It doesn't work. Because they haven't figured out that what you really need to do is build a team of people with different skill sets who collaborate. We try calling them cross-functional teams, we try calling them feature teams, but you need to have people together who can end-to-end get responsibility into delivering a service. People who are capable of doing development, continuous integration, who have knowledge about security, who have knowledge about testing, who know how to get metrics out of their platform, who know how to together write log files that are readable. And what I usually advise people is to seat them together for the first couple of weeks. The more mature your team grows, the less you'll need to get them together. But if you work with distributed teams, if you work with people in different offices in different countries, getting those people to work together, getting those people to spend some time together in the evening. DevOps started in Belgium, and one of the initial jokes we started to say is, well, a DevOps engineer is somebody who's got drunk on beer and drinking sushi. And we did that because that's where you meet people. That's how you get to talk to people. The thing they have in the fridge downstairs, we don't call beer. We call that, well, we don't have names for that, colored water. But getting people together and getting them to get to know each other improves collaboration. So that's one of the first steps. Make people understand what the person next to him is doing. You don't need to be an operations guy who knows how to write Java. You don't need to be a Java developer who knows how to run operations. But together you can understand what the impact is of memory management. Together you can understand what the change is if you have more database operations on your platform. So seat them together. A lot of people say that DevOps is the extension of Agile. So when people start doing Agile software development, they take responsibility into the teams, they do frequent releases, they do continuous integration, they do 2-week sprints, they do stand-ups, and all of those things. And some people claim that, well, that was very interesting, but we forgot something. We forgot to add the ops people. We forgot to add security people. We forgot to add the business. And DevOps is expanding on that. Now, if you see traditional software development, it starts with waterfall, where somebody has an ID. In 6 months, we need this functionality. And we're going to build this, and then we're not going to talk to the business for 6 months. And in 6 months, there's going to be something which is in place which does absolutely not look like what the business wants. And we're going to go back to the drawing board. And we're going to waste another 3 months. And we're going to waste another 6 weeks. And eventually, the project gets canceled. So one step further is that people say, hey, we do this agile, but we're not going to change our organization. We're going to adopt the scaled agile framework. We're going to do stuff which we call watermill, which is pretty much the same. We're going to do things and in 6 months stuff is going to work, but we are going to let our development teams and our ops teams work agile. They can do sprints, they can do 2 weeks releases, they can do stand-ups, but fundamentally we're not going to change our organization. And that's what we call failed agile, and people have called another term for that. They call it the scaled agile framework. So just doing scrums, just doing 2-week stand-ups doesn't change your organization. Forcing people to do scrums is not going to help you move forward because they have different needs. That's the first time I've had a cat in my audience. Okay. Funny. Moving ops people to doing 2-week sprints is not going to change the way they deal with outages. It's not going to change the way they deal with broken stuff. Ops people are obviously more suitable to work in a Kanban style, where they'll limit the work in process they have, where they limit the number of things they can work on concurrently, and where you basically give them a flow so they can get things moving, and you can pinpoint and you can make visible what the actual problem is that is blocking their progress. So there's different ways of implementing agile in a good way, which allows you to move forward. And like I said, is your whole organization agile, or is it just your development team? Is the business involved? And there's typically 2 kinds of businesses in agile environments. It's the one who doesn't care how you run IT, it's the one who is not adapting their processes, and they're not involved in building software, where typically you get those 6 months release cycles and, oh, that's not what we wanted, can you please start over? Or there's the one who realized that, well, IT is not a cost center, IT is here to help us deliver. And they go in with the developers, they actually are coming to the project demos, and they're actually guiding the agile teams toward building features that they need. And that's where agile really shines. And those are the ones that are adopting. Those are the ones that are really taking in ideas from the DevOps movement. So, putting people together. What happens a lot of times is we've got a dev team, we've got an ops team, what about we just move them together? Oh wait, we had 2 managers. What about we take one of those managers and make them the scrum master? Doesn't really work, because now you have 2 people who were used to tell other people what they need to do. They're still fighting how to do that together. And rather than creating a team which is really self-supporting, there's still 2 managers. Was the ops guy going to listen to the old dev manager who still is on the same pay grade, or is he actually going to become somebody who comes up with ideas, who comes up with figuring out how to improve things? Probably not. So you need to get management out of those old practices also. If you don't have top-level commitment that people are allowed to try these things, that people are allowed to make those changes, things are probably not going to change. Trying this with a team that basically knows their software is going to be end of life in 18 months is also not a good place to do it. But you need to find ways into getting those people to try and experiment while the old management patterns of doing something quickly along the lines is not going to work. That's another topic. A lot of those organizations have a lot of architects. Architects who haven't written codes for months. Architects who haven't run a platform. They come up with these fancy, nice drawings that don't work. They come up with these fancy solutions with products they've learned about on trade shows. Like Docker, Docker, Docker. Oh wait, how many kernel panics did we have on Docker yesterday? 3. Do the architects know? No, because they never run Docker in a production platform. Get those people back to write code. Get those people back in the teams. Because they used to be valuable, that's why they got promoted. They used to have skills, that's how they got promoted. Get those people to actually build stuff again. Does your finance department know you're doing DevOps now? Do your developers have actual sufficient rights to spin up new VMs? Or is that something that only the ops people can do? Who's getting your software in place? Is software acquisition, is that purchasing? Or are that your engineers who basically find out which tool is the right tool to use, start using it, and use it? I mean, one of the first things I said is the whole DevOps movement started out of people doing agile, cloudy stuff. That means people with credit cards and just spinning up machines they needed, and open source people. And a lot of us were senior open source people, and a lot of us still are. We build stuff on top of things we know that is stable. So you still need to spend money, but it's probably not going to be with Oracle or IBM who's going to get the money from you and not going to help you. You need to spend money with people who are contributing to your code, or even contribute to code yourself. And then comes the other fun part, outsourcing. So a lot of organizations struggle with this. They've got this thing called in place, which is, I can't even pronounce it anymore. I can't say service level agreement, because to me it's a secret lying agreement. Because you all know that the people that are running your operations from a different company have no way they can take responsibility for the crap your developers just added on their platforms. Because that's how they think of you. They are the people who are going to say no, because they're supposed to manage this thing. They have no way of doing that. So they obviously think that everything that's coming from the other side is crap. How do you think you can collaborate that way? You can't. So who's going to point at who, when? That's the game. And that's why you are paying a lot of money. It's not because they can actually manage the platform. So getting those people to work together, that's a real challenge. It's possible. I've done it actually in a couple of teams where the outsourcing partner was going to be embedded in the team. But it also means you need to take on getting developers on call. It's all fun challenges. So you became agile. You're now having developers and operations people working together. But there's still the data center that needs to be migrated. There's the operating system upgrade that needs to be done. Those are separate, isolated projects which you're managing in an ITIL-style approach, like a real waterfall. No. These are things you need to put on the shared backlog of your developers and your operations people. These are the things that developers need to be aware of. You're going to do a network upgrade. You're going to completely change the operating system level stack underneath. Everybody needs to be involved. Everybody needs to be working together. Otherwise, these side projects are going to fail. So, there's this school of thought which came out of England, which gave us a huge library of best practices on how to run an IT department. And a lot of people think that DevOps and ITIL are absolutely not compatible. A lot of people have a really bad experience with ITIL. Those were the people who say no. Those were the people who say, Friday at 10 a.m. in a meeting, no, we're not going to do this change. You come back in 2 weeks and we'll meet again. And a lot of that is true in organizations where ITIL was looked at as a rigid set of instructions which you should not deviate from. When you look at it as the Holy Bible and everything is, this is how we're going to do it step by step. But that's not what the initial goal was. It was a library of best practices. And those best practices can still be used. The bad way of ITIL is people who go to their office and go there to make sure that all the procedures that are put in place are being followed. The good way of doing ITIL is people who go to their office and say, these are the procedures, we're going to automate all of them, and all of these things are now going to go 10 times faster, or even 500 times faster. But the principles are still going to be there. It's just not going to be a bunch of suits in an office at Friday at 10 a.m. it's going to be Jenkins or Circle CI or your CI seat saying, it's green, deploy, because we've done all the checks. We've moved all of the decisions much earlier in the process of delivering software. So I know you're not all awake, you're not all human, but who has security as a part of their job? One person? Who does not have security as part of his job? Why not? Security is part of everybody's job. The whole idea that security is something you should put in a corner afterwards is why security doesn't work. Everybody who's involved in doing software delivery should be aware of security. It should be part of the team. It should be security built in. It should not be architected somewhere in the back. Just like we're not adding monitoring in the back anymore. We're not adding scalability in the back anymore. Security is something you want to build in up front. Because that's how you go from DevOps to Devoops. Because one of the basic oops is, oh, we got hacked. Because the ops folks are not involved, because the security folks are not involved. So all of this is a lot of culture stuff. There's also a lot of automation stuff needed. DevOps is about culture automation. We need to automate all the things. If it moves, if somebody is involved doing it, you want to automate it. You want to have build automation so you can actually reproduce an artifact and make sure that you have an unmodified artifact which goes through the whole pipeline where you go from development to testing to acceptance to production to shadow production to disaster recovery to all of those stacks. And building software, testing software, deploying software, all of those components should be automated. In a way, infrastructure as code and being able to automatically spin up new environments is a testing requirement and is a security requirement. You cannot test something if you're each time manually adapting things. You're going to have different test results. And if you cannot make sure that you have a delivery pipeline which allows you to take any piece of software and push that through production in a matter of hours rather than months, it means that your platforms are going to be vulnerable for the time you cannot ship. So if you're running, for example, Drupal in production, and every Wednesday evening there's a Drupal security alert coming out, and if you're not capable of upgrading your stack, that means that as long as you haven't upgraded it, that Wednesday evening when there's a core vulnerability on the mailing list, everybody is capable of having your stack till the moment you can upgrade. So for security, things like continuous delivery is a requirement. So this is what everything dreamed of. This is actually the back cover of Jess Humble's book on continuous delivery. But what it states is that we're going to do things like continuous delivery by building infrastructures, data and configuration together, and that we automate all of this. Development and operations, everybody together. And we're going to do stuff like build continuous delivery pipelines. I know I was doing workshops with ING, and one of the things we had with the IT Academy was the DevOps workshop. And the first slide deck we had was basically a screenshot of one of the team's continuous delivery pipeline, and it was red. And after 18 months, when we kept on doing workshops, the team actually had updated their slide deck to show their own continuous delivery pipeline, and it was fully green. So they were maturing, they were learning themselves, but they managed to actually deploy stuff to production. A lot of people want to do continuous delivery, they want to go to continuous deployment, but they forget about the core part, which is continuous integration. If you're not doing development on master, on trunk, and you're not continuously testing what you built, there's no way you can achieve a maturity level where you can continuously deliver software. And there is no way you're going to ever achieve a point where you are certain that you can automatically deploy without humans. So testing and test automation is one of the core components you need to get in there. Culture, automation, monitoring and metrics. monitoring used to be an afterthought. It used to be something nobody had money for, nobody had time for. And a lot of environments, the monitoring was basically somebody picking up the phone and the end user saying, stuff doesn't work. If that's the way you get monitoring, you've got a problem. And sometimes people don't pick up the phone, they just tweet about it. And people figure out on Twitter that their site is down. That's not monitoring. Today, we have monitoring which is part of our infrastructure as code. When we spin up a new instance of an application, we automatically monitor it, we automatically get metrics from it. We have tools like, this is, I think, an old screenshot from a Kidana, which allows us to really build fancy dashboards that will get both the business and the ops people and the developers to get some insight into what's really happening. You know, you can push metrics a bit too far and put dashboards in every single room. But if you do that, you need to also educate the people on what's really on the screens. I've been walking around in large organizations who actually set metric boards on every single team. But the teams had no clue what was on the screen. They couldn't explain what was on the screen. Then your monitoring effort has failed. What you really want to achieve is a way of self-service metrics where management can say, hey, we want to see the current turnover. We want to see the number of subscriptions. We want to see the number of people actually paying for our services. Where maybe the ops people say, hey, we want to see what the HTTP statistics are doing. And the DBAs want to see the metrics for number of queries, number of slow queries. And we've got all these tools out there now. All of these open source tools like Graphite, Grafana, InfluxDB, Prometheus, things like Logstash, things like Graylog, which are allowing us to build better monitoring platforms than we could 5 to 10 years ago. And there's nothing keeping us from actually using those. We don't have to go into user interface, clicking around and fiddling with metrics. We can get those really cheap and really good now. So when you get those self-service metrics, you can actually have people who share those dashboards, who share those IDs, who share what they've been building. So you can visualize business metrics now. You can actually say, these are the number of API calls we had on that API for the past 3 weeks. Yes, it has been 0. Let's decommission this application and marketing should stop investing in it. It's going to be a real tough discussion with marketing because they just spent like €2 million building this thing and you want them to decommission it because nobody's using it. But you can visualize this now because we have those metrics. DevOps is about working together so that we've automated a lot of things. We now can focus on the really important things. We don't have to worry about doing a small manual change on a platform anymore, so it has to be in sync. We know that we can spin up a new platform and that disaster recovery is in place. And it is going to prevent us from oopses. DevOps is about reducing risk. Gartner still hasn't understood. They think you need to have bimodal, where type 1 is the stable environment where you don't take risk, and type 2 is the agile environment where you do risky stuff. What they haven't figured out is that through automation, through testing, the small increments, the small changes we do continuously and faster, it's much less risky than upgrading a platform every 6 months in your legacy style. But hey, they usually take 5 years to figure out anything. But DevOps is here to make sure that you then get those oops anymore. Through collaboration, to automating, to better monitoring, and to metrics. And it's not about the tools you use. Yes, the wrong tools will block you, and the good tools will speed you up. But it really is about changing how you work. It is about people going back to work and having fun. And it's about really getting those people to work together again. And that's what DevOps is really about, and that's how you do prevent oops. Thanks. Do we have time for questions, or we have time for questions? if people still know how to raise their hands. Got a question here. Yes, this is Fedora 23. Sorry? Yes, this is Fedora 23. Okay, yeah, that was not a question. Okay.
So you were talking about continuous delivery, continuous integration, and you said using master. Are you not are you advocating against branches?
So I'm advocating completely against branches. The only branches I do tolerate are featured branches, and those should live less than 8 hours. If they live longer than 8 hours, it means your team is not testing everything against each other. I know that when I'm working with large organizations like governments and banks, I actually try to get them down from branches that live for eternal to branches that live for 2 weeks to get into their sprints. But when I'm working with my own teams, feature flags are the way to go. And branches that are actually around, typically, the moment somebody branches, you're lost. Because that piece of code is never going to be integrated back into the master branch smoothly. More questions?
We have room for one more question. Thank you very much, Kris. Now it's a break till 11:45. So, and after that you can come here or downstairs. Okay.